She stood before the entire pack as the man she'd been promised to for 18 years rejected her in front of 300 witnesses. He called her unworthy. He called her witch spawn. He waited for her to shatter. She didn't beg. She didn't weep. She lifted her chin and she smiled. Not a performance, not defiance. The quiet, complete smile of a woman who had just set down something heavy and realized she was finally free. No one in that hall expected it, especially not the Alpha King watching from the shadows, the coldest ruler in the 5 territories, who had spent 12 years searching for the one soul that could save him. Could the woman no one wanted be the one his dying wolf had been waiting for all along? The great mead hall of Ashenvale smelled of pine resin and old ambition. Torchlight bled amber across the raftered ceiling, catching the dust motes that drifted down like slow snow. 300 wolves sat packed along the long oak tables, their breath fogging faintly in the chill rolling off the stone walls. A cold that had nothing to do with the season and everything to do with anticipation. They had come for a show. They dressed it up in ceremony, draped it in tradition, but Lyra Wren had understood from the moment she woke that morning exactly what today was: a culling. She stood at the center of the raised dais, positioned as though this were an honor rather than a sentencing. The furs she'd been given to wear were the finest she'd owned in 22 years, which told her everything she needed to know. They wanted her to look presentable while they destroyed her. A wolf offered to the pack in beautiful wrapping. Around her, she could hear them. She had always been able to hear them. Half-blood. The word moved through the crowd in a current she could track like a scent. Healer's daughter. Herb witch. Abomination. The words had followed her since childhood. Since the night soldiers dragged her mother from their cottage and left 7-year-old Lyra alone in the dark, with nothing but the smell of burned sage and an ember that refused to die in the hearth. She remembered that ember, how it had burned through the whole cold night without fuel, small and stubborn, absolutely unwilling to go out. She had not understood at 7 what it meant. She had only been grateful for the light. Her uncle, Pack Elder Osric Wren, stood to the left of the dais, his expression arranged into the careful neutrality of a man who had already decided the outcome. 15 years of cold charity, meals at the far end of the table, doors closed when she approached, conversations dropped to silence when she walked into rooms. 15 years of being tolerated, which was its own particular cruelty, worse in some ways than simple hatred, because it gave her just enough to keep her from leaving. Beside him stood Brander Holt, her betrothed, or the man who had been her betrothed until 3 days ago, when he'd walked into her uncle's hall with 2 friends and told her, very calmly, that he wouldn't be proceeding with the arrangement. She had said nothing then. She had only looked at him, and perhaps that silence had unsettled him enough that he'd decided a public ceremony was necessary, that he needed witnesses, that simply walking away hadn't felt like enough of a declaration, that he needed her to break in front of everyone. Brander was handsome in the broad, uncomplicated way of men who had never been refused anything. Golden-haired, strong-jawed, Beta's son. She had known him since they were children. He had been kind once, or she had believed he was kind, which was perhaps not the same thing. Children could be generous when they didn't understand yet what their generosity cost them. He stepped forward, and the hall went quiet. I, Brander Holt, son of Beta Grimmer, reject you, Lyra Wren, as my mate and my future Luna. The bond that had been woven between them in childhood, a pack arrangement, a political knot of silk and obligation, began to unravel. Lyra felt it. She would have had to be made of stone not to. The sensation moved through her chest like a thread being drawn slowly through a needle's eye, a long, precise tearing. Every nerve ending screamed at her to fight it, to beg him to stop. She breathed. She kept her shoulders square. She let her face remain perfectly, absolutely empty. You are unworthy of our blood, Brander continued, his voice gaining the confidence of a man who had rehearsed this. Your mother was a hedge witch who practiced the old craft and deceived our pack. The blood in your veins is impure. You are an insult to every wolf in this hall." He paused, letting the silence build like water behind a dam. "Have you nothing to say?" Lyra looked at him. She had, over the years, imagined this moment, had rehearsed speeches, imagined retorts, constructed elaborate arguments for why she deserved to exist in this world that had never quite wanted her. But standing here now, with 300 wolves watching and the bond fraying in her chest, she found she had nothing to say to Brander Holt at all. He wasn't worth the words. "I accept your rejection," she said. 4 words, steady as stone. No tears, no trembling lip, no crack in the glass of her composure. And then, because she had decided, somewhere between waking and walking to this dais, that she would not give this room what it wanted, she did something no one expected. She smiled. Not a performance, something private and complete. The expression of a woman who had just set down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. The smile of someone who was, finally and at great cost, free. The silence in the hall was total. She heard someone. She heard the creak of a bench as someone shifted their weight, uncomfortable. And she heard, from somewhere near the back of the hall, from the darkness beyond the reach of the torchlight, a sound that was barely a sound at all. The slow of a man who had been holding his breath. Brander's jaw tightened. "That's it?" The rehearsed confidence cracked, replaced by something uglier. "You're not going to beg?" "No." She held his gaze a beat longer, steady and clear. Was there something else? "The pack elder." "The rejection is witnessed by the laws of—" "Hold!" The voice came from the shadows near the great hall's entrance. Low, quiet, and carrying an authority so absolute it didn't need to be raised to fill the room. Every wolf went still, not from politeness, but from instinct. The deep animal recognition of something apex moving through the space. The crowd parted. Lyra turned. The man walking toward the dais was tall. That was her first thought. Tall, taller than any wolf she had encountered. Broad through the shoulder in the manner of someone built for function rather than appearance. He wore a coat of midnight wool, traveling worn, mud-dark at the hem, moving with the particular economy of motion that spoke of a body accustomed to violence and unafraid of it. Dark hair falling across a face arranged by some precise and merciless architect into sharp lines at the jaw and cheekbone. A mouth that had forgotten how to soften. And his eyes, even across the hall, even in the uneven torchlight, storm gray, pale as ice over deep water, scanning the room with the detached assessment of a man who had already mapped every exit. The pack elder made a strangled sound. "Your Majesty." He dropped into a bow so fast he nearly folded in half. We weren't expecting your delegation until the morrow." "Continue," the king said. The word landed like a stone in still water. He crossed to the dais in unhurried strides and stopped directly in front of Lyra. This close, she could see the scar along his jaw, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many nights without sleep, the deliberate looseness of his hands at his sides. She refused to look away. "You accepted the rejection," he said. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Without begging." "Yes." Those pale eyes studied her, not her body, her. The way a man reads a map, looking for what lies beneath the surface markings. Why? She had not expected why. "Because begging wouldn't have changed the outcome," she said. "And I had no interest in handing my pain to people who would enjoy it." Something moved in those winter-gray eyes. A shift, like ice settling deep in a frozen lake. Like something cold deciding whether or not to crack. The silence stretched between them, the silence of two people measuring each other with the care of those who understand that measurement matters. Then Alpha King Aldrich Stormvale turned to Pack Elder Osric Wren and said, with the tone of a man announcing something already decided, "She leaves with me tonight." The hall erupted. Lyra stood in the center of it, unmoved. She heard her uncle. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular." and Brander's raised pitch. "She's half-blood! She's witch-born! She's not fit to!" And the king's voice cutting through it all. "I don't recall asking for opinions." The frost came then. She watched it form along the edge of the king's coat sleeve, spreading outward across the stone floor toward her uncle's boots in a thin, geometric film. Osric Wren looked down at the frost touching his feet and went the color of old ash. "Ashenvale's debts to the crown are considerable," Aldrich said. "Consider them forgiven in exchange." Her uncle's face ran through its calculations, pride lost to arithmetic. "As your majesty wishes." "Collect," Lyra thought, "as though I am a debt being called in." "Come," the king said. Not a request, an expectation, delivered without cruelty, which made it more absolute than if he'd shouted. She gathered the furs and followed him through the parting crowd, down the long hall, through the massive doors into the cold night. The whispers followed her out. She'll be dead within a fortnight. He'll tire of her. Whatever curse is on him, she won't survive it. The courtyard was dark, torches guttering in a wind that smelled of snow. A black carriage waited, horses breathing silver steam in the torchlight. The king stopped before the door and didn't open it for her. He looked at her hands. "You're shaking," he said. She looked down. She was. Fine tremors running through her fingers. The bond had finished tearing now, cleanly and completely, and the absence of it left a hollow in her chest that the cold was rushing to fill. "I apologize, Your Majesty." "Don't. Get in." The interior was warmer than expected. Dark velvet, a small iron brazier throwing steady heat, thick furs. She sat on one side, pulled her hands into her lap, willed them still. The king folded himself into the seat across from her with the efficiency of a man who had made peace with long journeys. The carriage lurched into motion. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The walls of Ashenvale fell away behind them. "Why?" she finally asked. He was looking at the middle distance, his profile sharp in the brazier light. "That's a broad question." "Why me? You could have princesses, lords' daughters, women with bloodlines that don't terrify people." "I didn't want any of them. Flat, factual, the way a man states coordinates." "And you want me?" "I want to find out what you are." He glanced at her, and in the brazier light his eyes held something more complicated than storm gray. "You'll understand more when we reach Vordenhall." "Are you going to hurt me?" The question came out smaller than she intended. Something crossed his face, not offense exactly, more like the expression of a man confronted with a conclusion about himself he didn't like. "No." "Then what do you want from me?" He studied her a long moment. "There is a curse on my bloodline," he said. "I will explain when we arrive. For now, you will have protection, chambers, status, everything Ashenvale denied you. In exchange, I ask only your time and your honesty." "And if the arrangement doesn't suit me?" "Then you leave with enough gold to build a life anywhere in the 5 territories." "But you won't refuse." The certainty in his voice might have been arrogance. It didn't sound like arrogance. It sounded like a man reading something true. "How do you know?" "Because you're a survivor, and survivors don't refuse chances to live." No cruelty in it, simple observation. The words landed somewhere unexpected, in her stomach, warm as the first swallow of something hot on a very cold night. He was right. He'd known she would accept before the carriage left the gate. "Fine," she said. "I'll hear your offer when we reach Vordenhall." "Good. Sleep. It's a long journey north." She should have stayed awake, but the carriage was warm and exhaustion had lived in her bones for years, patient as a creditor, and before she understood what was happening, her eyes had closed. She didn't see him watching her, didn't hear the quiet thing he said to the dark between them, barely breath at all. Finally. 3 days north, the carriage crested the ridge. Lyra pressed her face against the cold glass and felt the breath leave her body. Vordenhall rose from the mountain's shoulder like something the rock had dreamed into being. Towers of black granite and pale quartzite, curtain walls disappearing into low cloud, ice tracing every windowsill and battlement in lace-fine patterns. The great gate stood open below, and even from this distance she could feel the cold radiating from the stone. Not weather, not altitude, something older. She had heard the stories. The cursed kingdom, the king becoming ice from the inside, the court where frost bloomed on dinner plates and servants moved quickly and never lingered. She had assumed it was embellishment. She had been wrong. Her chambers were larger than any room she'd slept in. A bed canopied in white fur, a fireplace tall as a doorway, windows overlooking a valley locked in perpetual silver. A maid had been assigned to her, Ingrid, slight and watchful, with careful eyes and the practiced stillness of someone who had learned the value of being underestimated. She had served Vordenhall's household for 11 years, she explained quietly while helping Lyra dress. Her father had been the castle's head archivist, a scholar who had spent his life cataloging the old records in the vaults below, and who had told her many things before he died. Lyra filed that information away without comment. The summons came that evening. The king's private study was books and firelight and the smell of old parchment. He stood with his back to her, facing the window, so still she might have mistaken him for part of the room if not for the frost crystals forming and dissolving on the window pane beside him, appearing and retreating in rhythm with his breathing, as though the cold leaked from him without his awareness. "Sit," he said without turning. She sat. Her heart struck her ribs with unnecessary force. When he turned, the firelight was too honest with him. Exhaustion was carved into every line of his face, deeper than 3 days of travel could account for. This was the exhaustion of years. 12 years ago, he said, settling into the chair across from her. I took the throne of Nordenvale after my father's death. I inherited a curse on my bloodline that has held this family for 300 years. He raised his hand, and she watched, transfixed, as frost crystals bloomed across the back of it, white, precise, intricate, spreading across his knuckles before slowly receding. Every king of Vordenhall loses his wolf, his warmth, his capacity to feel anything at all. My father was a frozen shell by the time he died. I am 12 years in. She stared at where the ice had been. Why are you telling me this? Because there is one way to break the curse. The king must find his true, fated mate, not a political arrangement, the one specific person whose soul the goddess paired with his. He set his hand flat on the desk. In 12 years, I have met every eligible wolf in the 5 territories, felt nothing, not a single flicker. The weight of 12 years of searching settled in the room between them. Until 3 nights ago, he said, when you accepted your rejection without begging, and smiled. Lyra went very still. My wolf woke. Not fully, but enough to recognize something. His voice was even, almost clinical. I don't know what you are, half-blood, witch-born, I care about neither. But I need to find out if you are my true mate. That is my offer. Stay in Vordenhall. Allow me to try to verify the bond. In exchange, everything I told you in the carriage. And if the bond isn't there? You leave with enough gold to build a life anywhere, never troubled again. And if it is? Something happened in those frozen eyes, a thinning of the ice, a glimpse of something beneath that had not seen light in a very long time. Something that looked like hope and was afraid of itself. Then you will save my life, he said quietly. And I will spend whatever remains of it making sure you never regret the choice. Lyra looked at this cursed, exhausted, carefully contained man who had looked at her walking away smiling from her own destruction and felt something wake inside him after 12 years of silence. She thought of the hollow in her chest where the severed bond had been. She thought of the ember that had burned all night in her mother's cottage and refused to go out. I agree to your terms, she said. He exhaled slowly. Good. We begin tomorrow. He turned back to the window. One more thing. The words came carefully, like a man picking up something with edges. The curse has taken most of what I was. I am not capable of love anymore. So whatever happens between us, do not expect warmth from me. Do not wait for sentiment. I cannot offer what I no longer have. I understand, Your Majesty. She crossed to the door, opened it, stepped through. And alone in the cold corridor, she looked down at her palm. A small flame curled there, golden, warm, spinning slowly in a hand that had never in 22 years produced fire. It lasted 3 seconds, then it was gone. She stood in the dark hall of Wardenhall and understood, with a certainty that moved through her bones like a bell being struck, that something in her had just decided to wake up, that it had been waiting, patient as a banked coal, for exactly this cold. The sessions began each morning at the 9th hour. She would come to his study, he would hold out his hand. She would take it, his fingers cold, the cold of stone in permanent shadow, and hold it in both of hers while he focused inward with an intensity she could feel as pressure in the room. Nothing happened. No spark, no recognition. The mate bond, if it existed, was not obliging them. But he kept trying. On the 3rd morning, she said, "You're frustrated." He didn't look up. "I am patient." "You're not sleeping. You're awake before the servants light the corridor fires. I can hear you pacing." He looked at her then, a sharp, recalibrating look. "Most people are afraid to speak to me this directly. My fear reserves are fully depleted." At the corner of his mouth, something happened. A small, quick thing, barely there, almost a smile, gone before she could be certain. "If I can't be honest with you, there's no point to any of this." "No," he said, after a moment, "there isn't." That evening brought a formal reception. Ambassadors from the Eastern Territories, protocol-heavy, every conversation carrying 2 meanings. He came to collect her himself, which Ingrid had told her was unusual. When Lyra appeared in the doorway in the silver gown he'd sent up, something moved across his face that he controlled quickly. "You're wearing it," he said. "You sent it." "I wanted you to match me." He gestured to his own attire, black threaded with silver, austere and deliberate. Together they looked like a designed thing, a pair. King and queen, she thought, and the thought was strange and warm and a little frightening. In the reception hall, he was different. A wall, flawless and impenetrable, performing the function of king so completely the man inside seemed absent. But she was close enough to notice the small things. The way his hand came to the small of her back when an ambassador asked her a question she wasn't prepared for. Not controlling, just present, a warmth through the silk that said, "I'm here." The way he deflected questions about her bloodline with such quiet authority that the people asking seemed briefly confused, as though they'd forgotten they'd spoken. "He's protecting me," she thought. Not with swords, with precision. 3 hours in, exhaustion pressed at the backs of her eyes. "You need air," he said near her ear. So quietly she felt the words more than heard them, his breath a warmth against her temple. He guided her through a side door onto a stone balcony overlooking the frozen gardens, rose bushes locked in ice, geometric hedges gone silver, everything suspended in perfect stillness. She gripped the railing and let the cold burn her lungs clean. "Better," he said behind her. "I'm not accustomed to being looked at," she said. "In Ashenvale, I was invisible." Which sounds like a complaint, but it was also its own freedom. "I have been watched every moment of my life." Something in his voice was different out here, stripped of the performance the hall required. Every movement noted, every decision measured against what a king should be, never simply allowed to be a person. He was quiet a moment. "Only a symbol." "That sounds lonely." "It is." The admission arrived before he could arrange anything around it. She didn't look at him, didn't mark it, because she understood instinctively that if she drew attention to the opening, he would close it. "Is that part of why you chose me?" she asked instead. "Because when you looked at me, you saw someone who wasn't looking at a king." A pause long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "I chose you," he said, "because when you accepted your rejection, something inside me stirred that I had believed was gone. He turned to face her, and in the moonlight, his eyes had shifted, deeper than their usual pale gray, the color of the sea at night. You are the first person in 12 years who has made anything move inside me at all. You said you were incapable of feeling. Perhaps, he said. I was wrong about that. His hand came up, and she did not miss the half-second hesitation, something overriding caution, a deliberate choice, and his cold fingers brushed her cheek, barely a touch. The contact lasted 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds, deep in the hollow where the severed bond had left its absence, fire stirred. Not visible, not yet, but real and warm and entirely beyond her management. She swallowed against it. We should go back inside, she said. Yes, but as they turned, his hand found hers in the dark, naturally, without comment, the way water finds a groove in stone. She didn't pull away. He didn't let go. They walked back into the light, joined at the hand, and neither mentioned it, and neither let go until the doors of the reception hall required them to. Everything shifted after that night on the balcony. The testing sessions extended past their allotted time, and when they ended, he didn't send her back. He asked her things, about Ashenvale, about her childhood, about the specific texture of the life she'd lived there. Not gently, directly, the way a man asks who intends to do something with the information. She told him. Her mother's execution when Lyra was 7, watched from a window she'd climbed in the dark to see, needing to witness even what she couldn't stop. Her uncle's cold charity, the servants who spat in her food, the children who threw stones, her cousin Vera among them, Osric's eldest daughter, who perhaps threw hardest because she understood most clearly what Lyra represented. Brander, who had been kind at 8 and learned better at 12. When she finished, his expression was the particular stillness of a man containing something that required effort to contain. If I had known, he said, after a silence with weight in it, I would have burned Ashenvale to the ground. The matter-of-fact certainty of it startled a sound from her, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something living in the space between. That would have been something to see, she said. He looked at her a moment longer, and she saw, clearly, with no room for doubt, that he meant it entirely. That evening he didn't send her back. Stay, he said, in his private sitting room, and it came out different from his usual commands, rougher at the edges, less certain. Not stay because I am ordering it, but something more exposed. They sat across from each other, wine between them, talked until the logs burned to coals. He asked about her mother, not the execution, but before, what she remembered. The smell of dried herbs and wood smoke. The songs sung while grinding roots. The small things grief keeps long after the larger memories blur. He listened without interrupting. She noticed when his glass frosted. You're colder than yesterday, she said quietly. He looked at the ice creeping up the side of the goblet. The curse accelerates in winter. When I am tired. He set the glass down. When I begin to hope. The word hope sat in the firelit room between them like something that had just walked in without being invited. She crossed to him without deciding to. She sat in the chair beside his, took his hand in both of hers, the way she'd done in the study, but closer now, deliberately so, and began to work warmth into his frozen fingers, slowly. One by one. Patient. He went absolutely still. What are you doing? He said, not a question. Trying to warm you. No one touches me like this. She looked up. He was staring at their joined hands with an expression she couldn't quite name, something stripped of its armor, something that looked like longing without any of the hunger usually attached to longing. The expression of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be handled gently and was, slowly, remembering. No one? She said. I am the king. I am cold. His jaw worked. I have ordered executions, led campaigns that left fields red. I have done what the throne required and not always been able to regret it. He stopped, looked toward the low fire. I am not a man who deserves this kind of gentleness. Monsters don't fight this hard to remain human, she said, His gaze came back to her quickly. She held it steady. "Why?" he said, low. "Do you keep trying to save me?" "I can offer you nothing real in return. Eventually, I will take everything from you, the same way I have taken everything from this kingdom." "You saw me," she said simply, "in that hall. 300 wolves, and you were the only one who looked at me and didn't see something to break." She wasn't going to say anything more. Wasn't going to say, "I am falling in love with you," because it was too soon and too large, and because hope made the curse fight harder. She said, "You were the first person who ever decided I was worth something." Something cracked in his face, a fissure running deep through the composure, all the way down to whatever lived underneath and had been living there quietly for 12 years. He turned his hand over in hers, slowly, deliberately, a choice, and brought her palm to his lips. The kiss was cold. His lips were winter cold against her skin, and beneath the cold, she felt something pushing upward, warmth from a deep place, a fire that had been burning on almost nothing for years, still alive. She felt her own fire answer from somewhere in her sternum, a response she hadn't known she was capable of. "Stay tonight," he whispered against her skin, his voice stripped of everything except the simple weight of the asking. Not for the testing, not for politics, just stay. "Yes," she said. She woke at some dark hour before dawn to his breathing changed. From slow, even sleep to something ragged and catching, each inhale seeming to require effort. She felt the cold before she opened her eyes, sharply dropped, the kind that presses against your face even under blankets, and when she looked, frost was forming at the edges of the bedding, climbing upward. "Aldrich." She didn't think. She pulled him close and wrapped herself around him completely, no gaps, all the warmth she had given freely. He clutched at her with a convulsive strength, his hands ice cold at her back, his breath in shallow, tearing pulls. "The curse is accelerating," he gasped. "Something has changed. It's fighting harder." "Because you started hoping," she said. "The curse feeds on despair. When you hope, it fights back." He made a sound that was almost laughter and not at all funny. "What a system." "Hold on to me," she said. "Don't let go." His forehead dropped to hers. This close, she could see his eyes in the faint gray light, storm gray and frost clouded, and deep beneath, struggling upward through thick water, a trace of gold. "I told you I couldn't love you," he said. His voice was unsteady in a way she had never heard it. "But lying here, feeling your warmth against me?" A shudder moved through him, hard. "I think I have been falling since the moment you refused to beg. Since the moment you smiled." "Don't say the word," she said quickly. "The curse." "I know." He pressed his lips to her forehead, cold, lingering. "I know." She tipped her chin up and kissed him, soft. Not a declaration, a question. A door opened a careful inch. His lips warmed beneath hers. His hands found her hair, and the warmth building in her sternum became something wilder. Fire, actual and real. Heat spreading beneath her skin until she felt lit from the inside, luminous and uncontained. When they pulled apart, he was staring at her with the expression of a man whose understanding of what is possible has just been permanently revised. "Your eyes," he said, voice rough at the edges with wonder. "They're glowing." She touched her cheek. Her skin felt like standing near a forge. "What is happening to you?" he breathed. She already knew. She had known since the night her mother was taken and the hearth fire had burned through the whole cold dawn, refusing to go out even when there was nothing left to burn. "The fire," she said. "It's waking up." He looked better in the morning, color in his face, the frost retreating from his fingers when she held them over the small breakfast table, pale winter light falling through the windows onto the bread and broth between them. A man present in his body in a way she hadn't seen before. "What you did last night helped," he said. "The fire. I still don't understand how. I've never been able to produce it before. My scholars may know something." His hand on the table shifted a fraction closer to hers, so small most people would not have noticed. She noticed it with every nerve she had and pretended otherwise. There are archives below the castle, centuries of records. I've been searching them for the curse. I may have been looking for the wrong thing. He was about to say more. She could see the breath drawn for it. A knock fractured the morning. Ingrid appeared in the doorway, composure carefully arranged around difficult news. Your Majesty, riders from Ashenvale arrived before dawn. Pack Elder Wren and... A half-beat pause. Branderholt. They're demanding Lady Lyra's return. They claim she was taken irregularly. The frost came back instantly. Lyra watched ice spike across the back of Aldrich's hand, across the tablecloth, along the rim of her cup. Are they... he said, very softly. Tell them to wait in the lower hall. He stood, and the temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. Then he turned to her, and his voice shifted, not command, but a precision of care. You have this choice. It belongs to you. You don't have to come. I know, she said. I'm coming anyway. In the council chamber, Lord Calder stood at his usual position, at the far end of the room, half in shadow beside the east window, still as a man accustomed to being overlooked and finding advantage in it. He had served as the king's chief advisor for 9 of Aldrich's 12 years of reign, and Lyra had observed over her weeks at court the particular stillness of someone who gathered information the way other men gathered wealth, quietly, consistently, with a precise idea of what it was worth. He watched her enter without expression. Osric and Brander arrived still in road furs, mud on their boots, the irritation of men who had ridden 2 days and expected to be met with contrition. My dear niece. Osric's smile lived entirely in the face's architecture, touching nothing beneath. We have been so worried. She is home, Aldrich said. He had not raised his voice once through this entire encounter. Lyra stood at his right, and it felt... she could feel the intention of it, like a declaration made without words. Your Majesty, surely you see the irregularity. The girl was taken in a moment of spectacle. Lady Lyra remains in Vordenhall under my protection. Leave within the hour, or I'll consider your presence here an act of aggression against the crown. Brander stepped forward, his control fraying. You can't threaten us over her. She's nothing. A half-blood with no pack, no standing. My mate! The words fell into the chamber like a stone dropped into absolute silence. Even Lyra went still. Aldrich turned to her, and his eyes, gray and cold and exhausted, and beneath all of it, carrying something fierce and certain she had not seen there before, held hers. The one the goddess chose for me, he said, and I will burn every territory between here and the eastern sea before I let anyone remove her from this hall. The moment he finished speaking, the world went loud inside her body. Not in the room. The room was shatteringly silent. But inside her, where the scar of Brander's rejection had lived like a healed-over wound, something pressed against it from the other side. A warmth that wasn't hers alone. A feeling like a sealed door blown open, and through that open door, she felt him. His cold, his years of it, his fear, his desperately guarded love, flooding into her at once. He made a sound she had never heard from him. He staggered. What's happening? She moved toward him without deciding to. The bond. It's activating the curse. His voice broke. The frost erupted outward from his skin, coating his arms, his throat, crawling toward his face in hard white patterns. It's fighting back. Lyra! She caught him, both hands flat to his chest, over his heart, and she pushed. Not against him, through him, with everything the fire had given her. The warmth building in her palms that was hers and her mother's and older than either of them. Heat poured from her hands, the frost hissed, steam rose. Hold on, she said. I have you. Hold on. Lady Lyra? Ingrid's voice. From the doorway, the archivist's daughter who had served this castle for 11 years, whose face was pale, but whose expression had the quality of someone who has decided that the moment for silence is definitively over. I need to tell you something, she said, about the curse, about your mother. Lyra held Aldrich's weight against her, hands still pressed to his chest, frost retreating fraction by fraction. Speak quickly. Your mother didn't die because of what they said. Ingrid moved into the chamber, past Osric and Brander and the staring guards, as though none of them mattered, which, under the circumstances, was accurate. She found something someone powerful needed to stay buried. She stopped beside them. The curse on Vordenhall's line was not placed by a stranger. It was placed by your ancestor, a Wren witch, 300 years ago. The room went very quiet. Your mother was a traveling healer, Ingrid continued, her voice steadying as she spoke. She found old records in a decommissioned pack archive 2 days south of here, records that hadn't been read in 100 years. She looked at Lyra directly. The first king of Vordenhall loved a Wren witch. He promised her everything, his name, his throne, a future for their child. But when she became pregnant, he set her aside for a pure-blood noble wolf, a political marriage. He chose the throne's security over the woman who had trusted him. Lyra's hands had stilled on Aldrich's chest. Beneath her palms, his heartbeat was slow and labored. Still there. Still fighting. The Wren witch cursed his line, Ingrid said. Every king would lose his warmth, his feeling, his ability to love, until a king of Vordenhall chose, freely and without political calculation, to love a woman of her blood. Not because she was useful, not because she was the last option. Because he chose her, named it aloud in front of witnesses, knowing what it cost. My mother found this, Lyra said. She was going to use the records to negotiate protection for you. She knew the rejection was coming, knew what Ashenvale intended. She came to Lord Calder, the king's chief advisor. Ingrid's voice went flat as stone. She trusted him. A sound from the far end of the room. Lyra looked up. Lord Calder stood where he had been standing since they entered, at the far end of the chamber, in the shadow he had chosen and maintained throughout the entire scene. His expression was not the expression of a man caught. It was the expression of a man considering his remaining options. 9 years, he said conversationally, of managing a king who could barely feel. Who needed guidance, someone to shape decisions when the cold made him incapable of weighing their consequences. His voice was smooth, pleasant, and the pleasantness was the most terrible thing in the room. Your mother came to me with a story that would have ended 300 years of the Calder family's work. She walked into my study and handed me the means of her own destruction. You had her killed, Lyra said, from a great still distance. Steady. I gave her name to the wolves, who wanted a witch to blame for the bad harvest that year. His smile was a small, neat, horrible thing. She came to me for help, and I was very helpful. He glanced at Aldrich, still held upright by her hands. He'll be frozen through in minutes. The bond will sever, and it will kill you both, and this will finally be over. I knew what you were the moment he brought you here. Did you really think you were the first Wren witch to walk through these doors? Something happened inside Lyra Wren. Not the slow-building rage of accumulated grievance. This was immediate. Complete. The way a wildfire is complete. Every year in Ashenvale, every stone thrown, every night lying awake wondering what crime she had committed by being born, and all of it traced back to one man's decision to protect his position at a table that had never been his. The fire answered her. It rose from somewhere beneath her ribs, older than anything she had consciously done, and it erupted, golden light from her skin, controlled, precise, furious. Not wild, not destructive. The fire of a woman who knows exactly what she is angry about. Calder threw himself backward with a cry, and she let him go, because he was not the point. She turned back to Aldrich. She knelt beside him, both hands cupping his face, and felt the curse pushing back. 3 centuries of grief and betrayal, enormous and accumulated. And beneath it, she understood now, never meant to be permanent. It had always been a question waiting for an honest answer. Aldrich. She pressed her forehead to his. Say it. Whatever you feel, say it out loud, in front of all of them. That's what breaks it. Not the bond, the choice. His eyes opened, gray and frost-clouded and deep beneath, struggling upward like something trying to surface through thick ice, a trace of gold. The curse is a question that has waited 300 years, she said. Your ancestor was asked, will you choose love over everything else? Will you choose a Renwich knowing what it costs, knowing every reason you shouldn't? She pressed her warmth into him, fire meeting frost, steam rising between them. Answer it, now, in front of all of them. He looked at her. This man who had told her he was incapable of love, who had been becoming ice for 12 years and decided it was what he deserved. She watched the decision move through him, not sudden, but final, the way a long winter finally concedes to spring. I love you, he said. Quietly, clearly, no performance in it at all. A man simply, at last, telling the truth. I have loved you since the moment you walked out of that hall with your chin up and your heart breaking, and that smile on your face for no one but yourself. I have loved you since I understood that your dignity belonged entirely to you and could not be taken from you. The frost was still spreading. He didn't stop. I love you, and I don't care what it costs. I would rather freeze loving you than spend another 12 years in this cold, not knowing what I was missing. The frost shattered, not gradually, not in stages. It exploded outward from his chest in a single instant, a shower of crystals catching the torchlight. The entire room briefly fractured into light, and then it was gone. All of it. 12 years of accumulated ice, dissolving in the air before it reached the floor. Color flooded back into his face like a sunrise moving fast. His hands, reaching for her, were warm. Warm. Actually, genuinely, humanly warm. The warmth of a man coming back into a body that had been half absent for 12 years. The warmth of a winter ending all at once. Through the bond, she felt him. Not just warmth, but him. All of him. Crashing into her like a wave she had not braced for. It was enormous and overwhelming and the best thing she had ever felt. And behind her, from somewhere vast and old and very tired, a presence she could not quite see. The first Renwich, who had planted her grief like a seed into a king's bloodline and waited 3 centuries to see what grew from it. Enough, the presence said. Not in words, in the quality of the air, in a warmth that moved through the room. It is enough. Let it be done. The curse is gone, Aldrich breathed. He looked at his hands, at the walls, at her. The expression of a man who has just been given back something he had stopped expecting. I can feel everything. He sounded stunned by the fact of it. Lyra. I can feel everything. He pulled her into his arms. The embrace was warm, wholehearted. The arms of a man who had 12 years of warmth backed up and was no longer rationing it. She pressed her face against his chest and felt his heartbeat. Fast, steady, real. And felt the fire in her settle into something calmer. Something that would burn for a long time without consuming. My mate, he said against her hair. My fire. They dealt with Calder in the hour that followed. Guards took him without ceremony. He went quietly, the composure of a man who had already moved to his next calculation. Lyra stood with fire still warm in her skin and said, The dungeons. Let him rot there watching his plans dissolve. A glance at Aldrich. That's sufficient. He gave the order without hesitation. Brander and Osric Wren departed before the hour was out. She did not go to see them leave. There was nothing between her and either of them that required a farewell. The accounting was done. The weeks that followed were unlike anything she had known. She helped thaw Vordenhall, practically, deliberately, going into the gardens each morning with her fire and working it slowly into the frozen ground. The roses came back first, stubborn, thorned, pushing up through cracked earth with the single-mindedness of things that have been waiting a long time for permission. Then the kitchen herbs. Then a plum tree at the south wall that no one had believed was still alive. The servants walked differently within a month. Less quickly, more upright, staying in corridors a moment longer than necessary. The way people do when they no longer fear what they'll encounter there. Aldrich moved through the experience of feeling things again with a particular expression she came to love. Deliberate, slightly bemused, a man rereading a language he'd been told he'd forgotten, but found he actually remembered. He didn't know how to be warm, in the easy, careless way of people who'd never been cold. So he was warm carefully, intentionally, which, she decided, was more than most people managed. He sent her things. Not only flowers, though there were flowers. The first roses from the south wall left outside her study door, without note. But considered things. A volume of herbal botany from her mother's tradition, found in the archives by a scholar given specific instructions. A window seat built into her chamber wall, deep and furred, facing the thawing garden, because he had noticed she liked to read with light. A small bone-handled knife, well-balanced, because she had mentioned once that she'd never owned one and he had been listening when she said it. He did not say "I love you" easily. It wasn't in his character, and she didn't want it to be. She had learned to read the language he used instead. The careful placement of her chair at his right at dinner, the way he rose slightly when she entered a room, the warm hands that found hers in corridors without requiring explanation. The morning she found him in the south garden, crouching among the recovered rose stems, frowning at a new bud with the focused intensity of a general assessing terrain, she stopped in the doorway and laughed. Full and easy, the kind of laugh she hadn't heard from herself in years. He looked up. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Only you." He looked at the rosebud, looked at her, and a smile crossed his face. Slow, unused, unpracticed. The smile of a man who has spent 12 winters learning how summer feels, and is only now beginning to trust it. It was the most devastating thing she had ever seen, and it was entirely hers. She crossed the garden to him. He stood to meet her, and his hands found her face the way they had learned to. Warm, certain, thumbs tracing her cheekbones with patient care. He tipped her chin up and kissed her in the thawing garden, in the pale light of the first clear morning Vordenhall had seen in years, with the sound of the castle coming back to life all around them. From above, she heard Ingrid's voice and laughter from the kitchen courtyard. The distant, ordinary sound of servants talking about something small and inconsequential. The sounds of a place that had stopped being afraid. She pulled back to look at him. "The council will want a formal announcement," she said. "The council will have to wait." His thumbs moved slowly along her jaw, watching her with the unhurried quality of a man who has learned the difference between urgency and importance. "I have been cold for 12 years. The council can wait one morning." She laughed again, and it rang off the thawed stones of the garden wall. Above the castle, a hunting bird called once, sharp, clear, carrying far. And in the bed below them, a rose opened in the winter sun, its petals the exact color of fire. Vordenhall had never been dressed for a wedding. Wolfsbane and white heather along the great gates. Pine boughs woven through with dried flowers in the entrance hall. The Stormvale wolf banners, black on silver, hung now alongside a new addition, a flame, gold on black, the combined sigil of a kingdom that had remembered how to feel. Lyra dressed in crimson and gold. The color was her choice, which briefly surprised the seamstress and did not surprise Aldrich at all. Dark hair loose under a circlet of hammered silver and antler bone, the first roses from the south garden woven through, small, cold-hardened, having survived winter and come back anyway. She thought of her mother while Ingrid fastened the last clasp at her shoulder. "You would have liked this," she thought. "You would have liked him, which would have surprised you. I will tell everyone your name. I will make sure you are remembered as you should have been remembered all along." The great hall was full. Lords and ladies from 4 territories, ambassadors, representatives from pack settlements across the north. They had come skeptical, some with barely concealed hostility. All of them had felt, The moment they cross Vordenhall's threshold, the difference. The warmth in the stone. The servants who met your eyes. The roses on the sill of every window in the entrance corridor, blooming in the middle of winter as though the castle had decided the rules of season no longer applied. Aldrich was waiting at the head of the hall. Deep blue and silver, colors she had chosen for him because you have worn black long enough. Straight-backed and still in his familiar way, watching her walk toward him with an expression that no one in that hall had ever seen on his face before. Undefended, fully present. The expression of a man who had decided, somewhere in the preceding months, to stop managing himself and simply be what he was. When she reached him, he took her hand. The warmth of it still surprised her. "I love you," he said, quietly, before the ceremony began. For her alone, a private thing folded inside a public moment. "I love you too," she said, "since the moment you saw me as someone worth claiming when no one else did." Later, at the feast, when the hall was warm with wine and music and the noise of people who have been afraid for a long time and are no longer afraid, a letter arrived from Ashenvale, Vera's handwriting, Osric's eldest daughter, who had thrown stones at Lyra in childhood and looked away when Lyra looked back. She set it aside until the dancing slowed, then opened it beside Aldrich, his arm warm and steady around her shoulders. "I was wrong about everything," Vera had written, the handwriting careful, each word chosen. "Father has been arrested for conspiracy in your mother's death. The records Ingrid brought to the Territorial Council have been reviewed and verified. The case is being formally reopened. Your mother's name will be cleared. The Council's announcement is expected within the month. I am not asking for forgiveness. I have no right to it. But I thought you should know that she is being remembered now, as she should have been remembered from the beginning. With honor. She deserved that. You both did." Lyra read it 3 times, folded it once, carefully. "It's over," she said. "No." Aldrich pressed a kiss to her temple, slow, deliberate, warm spreading outward from that one point. "It's just beginning." He was right. The fire in her would not go out again. The king who had forgotten how to feel now felt with the ferocity of a man making up for 12 lost years, and he was not quiet about it in the ways that mattered. Written in action and attention and presence, in the language of a man who has decided that warmth is not weakness. The half-blood nobody of Ashenvale had become the queen whose fire freed a kingdom from 3 centuries of ice, and she was only beginning to understand what she was capable of. And somewhere across the thin, bright distance between the living and the gone, 2 women watched a wedding. A mother who had died carrying records meant to save her daughter, who had hidden her daughter's fire so deep that even her daughter couldn't find it, until love woke it. And beside her, old and tired, and finally, after 300 years, at rest, the first Wren witch, who had planted her grief like a seed and waited for someone to understand it had never been meant to grow into permanent winter. She chose love over bitterness, the ancestor said, the way I never managed to. She didn't smile to hide the pain, said the mother. She smiled because she had already decided, before he walked through the door, before any of it, that she would not be broken by them, that their cruelty was theirs to carry. Her wholeness was hers to keep. A pause, warm and quiet as firelight. She was always like that. I never had to teach her that part. Below them, in a hall that smelled of pine and bread and fire and roses blooming out of season, Lyra Wren, queen, witch-born, firekeeper, the woman who had walked away smiling from her own destruction, danced with her king. And the warmth spread out from Vordenhall like a tide. And the winter, at last, was over. The girl who smiled when she should have begged. There are moments in life when the world expects you to break, when everyone in the room is waiting, almost wanting, to watch you fall apart. When the silence feels like a held breath, collective and cruel, and all the weight of their expectations presses against your chest like a stone. Lyra Wren had that moment. She stood on a raised dais in front of 300 wolves, in borrowed furs, wearing the finest clothes she'd ever owned. dressed up for her own destruction. The man she'd been promised to for 18 years looked her in the eye and called her unworthy. Witch spawn. Impure. He listed every reason she didn't belong, every inherited shame she'd carried since the night soldiers took her mother and left a 7-year-old girl alone in the dark. He waited for her to shatter. She didn't. She said 4 words. I accept your rejection. Steady as stone. And then she did something no one in that hall could have predicted. She smiled. Not out of spite. Not to perform strength she didn't feel. She smiled, the way a person smiles when they finally set down something unbearably heavy and realize, oh, I didn't know I was this tired. It was the smile of someone who had just, quietly and completely, become free. That smile changed everything. We spend so much of our lives rehearsing for the moments when people try to diminish us. We prepare speeches. We construct arguments for our own worth. We practice what we'll say when someone who was supposed to choose us decides not to. But Lyra had nothing to say to Brander Holt. Not because she was defeated, because she finally understood something essential. He wasn't worth the words. Her pain was real. She felt the bond tearing through her chest like a thread drawn through a needle's eye, but her pain was hers. It didn't belong to the crowd. It didn't belong to him. She refused to hand it over to people who would enjoy it. That refusal, that small, radical act of keeping her own wholeness, is what the story is really about. What follows is a love story, yes, a cursed king, a woman with fire sleeping in her blood, a bond that shakes 12 years of ice loose from a man who had forgotten he was allowed to feel. But beneath all of it is something quieter and more important. It's a story about what happens when someone finally sees you. Not your bloodline, not your usefulness, not your potential to solve their problem or fill their absence. You, the actual, complicated, surviving person you have managed to become despite every obstacle placed in your path. Aldrich Stormvale, cold, cursed, careful, watched a woman walk away from her own rejection with her chin up and her dignity intact, and something woke inside him that hadn't moved in 12 years. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was powerful, because she was whole. Because cruelty had been aimed at her, and it had not made her cruel in return. Because she'd decided, before he ever walked through the door, that her wholeness belonged to her and no one else could take it. He fell in love with someone who had already decided she was worth loving. And isn't that the thing we all quietly need to learn? The curse in this story isn't really about ice. It's about what happens when people choose power over love, security over honesty, convenience over the person who trusted them completely. The first Wren Witch didn't plant a curse out of malice. She planted a question that would echo through 300 years until someone finally answered it honestly. Will you choose love, freely, knowing what it costs? And the answer, when it finally came, was quiet and completely unperformable. No strategy, no calculation. Just a man who had been cold for 12 years looking at the woman who had refused to be broken and saying, simply, I love you. I have loved you since the moment you walked out of that hall with your heart breaking and your chin up, and I don't care what it costs. The frost shattered. Here's what I keep returning to. Lyra didn't smile to hide her pain. She smiled because she had already decided, before the Alpha King arrived, before any rescue came, before she knew that anything good was waiting for her, that she would not let them have her pain to play with. She walked into that hall understanding she might leave it with nothing, and she chose dignity anyway. Her wholeness was never contingent on someone choosing her first. That's the lesson, I think. That's the ember that burned all night in her mother's cottage and refused to go out. You are not less because someone failed to recognize your worth. Their inability to see you clearly is their blindness. It is not your truth. The right people, when they arrive, will not need to be convinced. They will simply look at you and finally feel something wake up that had been sleeping for a long, long time. Set down what was never meant for you. Lift your chin, and if you must smile while doing it, smile for yourself. That smile might just change everything. If this story moved you, Drop a word in the comments, even just how it made you feel. Your reaction is literally what tells me to keep making these. A like, a share, a subscribe. It all goes a long way. Thank you for spending this time with me, really.